Greetings from Tillotoma Foundation. Good evening and welcome to all the viewers from across the world. I take immense pleasure in welcoming all of you to this international seminar on Roadmap to Peace in Afghanistan, organized by Tillotoma Foundation. We shall discuss this crucial issue with the distinguished speakers scheduled to speak here today. We are very happy that we have been able to organize this conference. As you know, Afghanistan is facing an uphill task in its journey towards sustainable peace and prosperity. The world stands with Afghanistan today. Afghanistan is led by brave men and women who are making a positive difference through their relentless struggle for peace and development. There are several challenges that Afghanistan faces today, which I'm sure will be discussed at length. But a strong resolve, conviction, and the support and commitment of benevolent partners can help Afghanistan to resolve them and march towards reconstruction. The recent announcement of the withdrawal of US and NATO forces from Afghanistan may be a step in the right direction. We need to continue to make efforts and spread awareness to build sustainable peace in Afghanistan. The problems of the women of Afghanistan are a special focus of this conference, along with the geopolitical and developmental issues. Women are targets of violence and abuse in conflict and post-conflict zones across the world. In Afghanistan, brave women have led a long struggle against discrimination and abuse for their rights. Today, we are privileged to have among us two excellent leaders of Afghanistan, Excellencies Ms. Fawzia Koofi and Dr. Habiba Sarabi, both members of the Afghan peace negotiation team. Ms. Koofi was the first female vice president of the National Assembly of Afghanistan, whereas Dr. Sarabi became the first female governor of a province of Afghanistan in 2005 when she became the governor of the Bamiyan province. Dr. Sarabi also served as the Minister of Women's Affairs of Afghanistan. I sincerely thank you both for being here with us. Your tale of struggle is a tale of inspiration and courage. We are also pleased to have among us His Excellency Mr. Dilshod Akhatov, Ambassador of the Republic of Uzbekistan to India and former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan, as well as Ambassador Vivek, Katju, former Ambassador of India to Afghanistan. Noted experts Dr. Christian Wagner, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, Mr. Apratim Mukarji, and Mr. Vishal Chandra are also scheduled to speak at this seminar. I must thank Dr. Meena Singh Roy, Professor Bolodas Ghoshal, and Dr. Wail Awad from Tillotoma Foundation for their immense contribution. I hope we have a very productive discussion. Now let me request Her Excellency Ms. Fawzia Koofi to present her views.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope the internet will accompany me and there is no disruption, because I know from previous experience I had, the good thing about virtual talks and virtual seminars are that they're easy to organize, but then of course with technology it's very unpredictable. The peace process of Afghanistan is now at its turning point. In fact, we had hoped that 2021 will be a turning point when it comes to establishment of peace in Afghanistan. When we started the peace negotiations in September 2020, there was enormous amount of optimism and expectations around the country, as well as among international partners, in terms of both sides demonstrating faith, demonstrating sincerity, and demonstrating flexibility to achieve a long-lasting and just peace in Afghanistan. However, since the peace talks have started in September, we continue to see violence escalating, not only in the battlefield, but also in targeting civilians. The military extremists actually have changed their tactics when it comes to targeting civilians since these negotiations have started. More women rights activists, more journalists, more civil society activists who have been regarded as a vocal voice of Afghanistan today are the target. And in fact, based on a report that was published by the UN Assistant Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, since the agreement is signed between the United States and the Taliban, there have been more than 400 women and civil society activists that are killed as a result of the targeted assassination. We know that in many countries, when there is peace talks, the warring parties try to demonstrate more power by escalating violence. We know that in some other countries this has been the case. But our hope was that in the case of Afghanistan, given the fact that the people of Afghanistan have already been in a very long years of war, over 4 decades of active war, and as a result of which millions of people actually have lost their lives, and the destruction that has come to this country, the economic opportunity that has been taken away from us, the opportunities for a prosperous Afghanistan in terms of being reliable partner, not only for politics, but also a reliable partner of economic opportunity, and Afghanistan becoming an economical hub for the world. All of those opportunities have been taken away from Afghanistan as a result of this 4 decades or over 4 decades of war. In fact, some of us have been born in war and grew up in war. We don't know what does peace mean. In fact, I am a live example of being grown up in a conflict and war, and have experienced enormous amount of violence and lives that have been lost in front of my eyes. Not only my family members, but also people who have been killed in front of my eyes as a result of civil war, Taliban brutality, and also post the Taliban government over the past 20 years. So our hope was that because we have been in active 4 decades of war, both sides will demonstrate some level of flexibility in terms of ceasefire. And that's why, on behalf of Islamic Republic, we actually proposed as our first agenda after the talks resumed in January this year, we proposed the first agenda item for discussion, ceasefire, because what we hope was that by implementing ceasefire, we can bring some relevancy of the peace process to the people's life. People want to see that the peace process actually impact their life in a positive way. We need to keep the people's trust in this process. People need to trust the process. And therefore, it's important that we discuss agendas and issues that actually impact people's life positively. And ceasefire was the demand of people, that with whom we have consultations across Afghanistan. We had thousands of sessions of consultation with people from local communities, victims of war, civil society, women group, community leaders, religious leaders, people from different walks of life. We had consultations, and their demand was to agree on a ceasefire. And that's why we proposed on behalf of Islamic Republic ceasefire as the main agenda item. And we proposed to the other side of negotiations that they also can present anything that is important for discussion as the first priority. But over the past 3 months that talks have continued in Doha, and I have been engaged in those talks along with my colleagues, we see that there is a reluctant and hesitant to enter to the main issues of substance. And that's why the new initiatives have started. The Troika initiatives held in Moscow with participation of the relevant countries, and as a result of which a good press statement or joint statement came out. We all know that in the joint statements, all the member states, all the members of the Troika meeting, they have clearly said that they do not support a return of Islamic Emirate. They want an Afghanistan to be inclusive, to be on the principles, based on the principles of democratic values. And therefore, because there has been no major progress to the extent that we had expected, although there are progress, and we continue to talk on issues like related to the agenda, we have some progress. But the hope of people was that we agree on a ceasefire, and we did not have much progress on that. While we also proposed to the other side that they can bring their agenda item for a political power sharing or political roadmap, and we will be willing to discuss that. But the other side did not actually demonstrate some level of, I would say, sincerity and faith on that. So therefore, we are engaged in negotiation. The negotiations continue. But our hope was that we will agree on ceasefire, which we did not. And therefore, not only the Moscow conference, but the next initiative is the Istanbul. process, and we were hoping that there will be a connection between Istanbul and Qatar, the Doha talks. So our expectation was, and an expectation still is, that Istanbul will basically draw a roadmap for a political participation and also a ceasefire, and agree on common principles. And then those issues will be detailed and agree on details for a political agreement. Again, in Doha, I mean, not necessarily the city I'm talking, but the Doha process, I mean, by the negotiation team. However, in the midst of all of this, we know that President Biden's announcement of unconditional withdrawal of its troops by September this year actually put the negotiation, intra-Afghan negotiation, in a miserable situation, because this certainly puts the other side of negotiation in a victorious kind of mode, because already after the signing of the agreement with the United States, I can see, I have been engaged in these dialogues for 3 months. I know that that they think that militarily or politically they will win. So I think that this was a mistake when, without reaching a political settlement, the U.S. government announced the withdrawal of all its troops by September without putting, the conditions of the Doha agreement in place, because based on the conditions that is put in the Doha agreement, everything is interconnected. The Taliban need to, agree or put more faith on intra-Afghan negotiation to agree on a political settlement which will pave the way for an inclusive government, including by Taliban. Because we know that the Taliban are one reality of Afghanistan, but they are not all reality of Afghanistan. There are other realities, the political community of Afghanistan, the institutions of Afghanistan. And we know that a rash withdrawal from not only many years back, only 25 years back, or 30 years back, when there was a rash withdrawal of Soviet Unions and Afghanistan was abandoned, it resulted to the collapse of institutions, and as a result of which civil war followed by the Taliban government was escalated. So we hope it will happen. We hope that our institutions are strong enough, and we hope that we will continue to benefit the strategic partnership with our traditional and strategic partners. But I must say that in the meantime, we are worried, because the other side of negotiation will think that anyways they are going to win in 4 months from now. So why should they actually put more time in negotiation? That's why they have been reluctant to attend the Istanbul conference, which we are hoping to happen, and we are hoping that it will actually pave the way for a political settlement. I stop here, and I would be willing to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Koofi, for your presentation, where you highlighted the problems within the Afghanistan peace process, the challenges and the opportunities, and what you look forward to. Now I will take questions from Dr. Awad.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. Ms. Fawzi, I believe you have focused on the importance of this ceasefire and also the loss of life of Afghani in this war. But bring me to the question why the government of Afghanistan has been sidelined by the United States while they were talking to Taliban and reached to an agreement, where the United States feel that the current government is part of the problem, not part of the solution. Can you elaborate more on this? And I would like also to ask you a question, personal question, which is a concern to me because I traveled to Afghanistan before and after the fall of Taliban, and I covered the Khushabauddin and late Ahmad Shah Massoud death and all, rahmatullah alayh. The question is, how can the Taliban honor an agreement with the United States without killing an American soldier while they are killing their own people? Can you elaborate on these two questions, please? Thank you.
You want me to answer the question?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. Well, in terms of the ceasefire and the rule of the government in Afghanistan, I mean, leaving the internal politics and internal differences and the problems that the government has aside, this is an officially UN recognized legitimate government elected by people, and I'm here not talking about the problems we face internally, because any government has its own problems. We also have our problems. I do not want to count them because I think most of you know what the internal problems are. But when it comes to our foreign policy, this is a UN recognized setting government, and it has to be one side of all the political processes and recognized by international community. So if you look back 3 years back, one of the challenges that we face right now in the negotiation table is the lack of inclusion of Afghan state or government. When the Taliban started, the Americans started their negotiation with Taliban 3-4 years back, and as a result of which the Doha agreement is now signed. I think this was a mistake, and I think we are now obliged to deliver on issues that we are not a signatory as government. We are not a signatory to the Doha agreement, but to honor the negotiations and to show flexibility and good faith. You know that the government, after the approval of the Loya Jirga, released almost 5,000 prisoners. Some of them actually committed major crimes. That was a level of flexibility and good faith for the negotiation. Most of those people who have been released from the prisons, unfortunately, have it's proven, and I know from my local village, that they have gone to the battlefield. And so therefore, I think it was important that the government and the state of Afghanistan was engaged, and it was a trilogue meeting instead of a bilateral meeting between American and Taliban. It was important that the government of Afghanistan was also included, which was not. Now we are here where we are, and that made our job at the negotiation table much more difficult. I think if we were included, the job was much more easier. In terms of the agreement, I think the United States need to review this agreement and see where the Taliban actually have respected it and implemented it. Because, as I said, the 4 elements of agreements are interconnected. The interconnectivity of the agreement is that the inter-Afghan negotiation will start, pave the way for a political settlement, an inclusive government, and then the foreign troops will withdraw. But the United States, the recent announcement, we see that it does not go in the line of the Doha agreement, because it's unconditional withdrawal, and this is not based on the Doha agreement. So we are hoping that still another 4 months that we have ahead of us will be used for agreeing on a political settlement. Although the road looks more bumpier, but we are trying everything, because the alternative is war, and in war no one will benefit. We have seen a lot of war. We have seen already, as I said and repeat, over 4 decades of war. It's not a good alternative. So we are trying to use the 4 months remaining to see if we can agree on a political settlement.
Thank you very much. I think I can take a question now from Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Soham. First of all, it is such a pleasure to see, Afghan women, and we have Ms. Koofi, who's just spoken. And I think the voice of Afghan women makes a lot of difference. My first visit to Afghanistan was in 2017, and that's when I saw the the real picture out there. Ms. Koofi, the question that I would want to ask you, I think the most sought after thing today in the whether we talk about the Southern Asian region, the Afghanistan, the Middle East, is the peace. And we, here in the institute, the Tillotoma Foundation, decided that the title has to be the roadmap to peace. Now, I think it's a very challenging, topic. The roadmap to peace is, from my point of view as a researcher, is the most difficult and challenging task today. in the era and in the world when, there are so many uncertainties. From your point of view, I mean, how do you see the future of women? I mean, most of the people are talking about the return of Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, in that situation, I think the biggest challenge is how things are going to unfold. And I'm sure the most of the debates that we've been hearing, whether it is from the Afghan, diplomats, the officials, and even the people outside, the major understanding is that there is not going to be return of the old era of Taliban. Now, if that be the case, then how do you visualize the image, the kind of challenges that the women and children and the education system especially is going to face in coming months and years?
Yeah, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your words of support and solidarity to the women of Afghanistan. That solidarity matters, and I think there is an invisible power in solidarity. So please do continue to raise your voice in the support of women of Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan. On your question about the future, I think the future of women in this country depends on the future of the country, basically. And that's why my point in the negotiation have always been that do not let the woman issue become like a standalone issue. It's an incorporated, integrated matter to all the gains we have and to everything that a democratic state will benefit. That's when the woman's situation depends on. That's where the woman's situation depends upon. So the woman situation in Afghanistan, going forward, the roadmap, I think it depends on how things will unfold and evolve. In a positive scenario, if in the coming few months, and starting from the Istanbul conference, if we manage to agree on a political roadmap for a political power sharing on the basis of people's desire, on the basis of democracy, on the basis of the fact that one individual will have the right of one vote, then I think the concerns over women's rights will be a traditional concern, not a new concern. Traditional concern means that always the women in our parts of the world, and especially in Afghanistan, have had problems, but not problems that are imposed by their governments, like the time that Taliban were actually imposing problems. So we are hoping that the future will be brighter. An inclusive government will not only will be, of course, not inclusive if the women are not part of it, and if women are not part of a political settlement, then the settlement will not be a sustainable settlement. This is a positive scenario. There is also a negative scenario. The negative scenario is that both sides of the negotiation, and in this case the Taliban, do not demonstrate flexibility for a political power sharing in Doha, in Istanbul conference, and we do not agree on establishing a government which Taliban could be part of it, along with the rest of Afghanistan. Then probably I agree that I must choose actually my words with more cautious, but I must say that the situation might deteriorate, and the deterioration of situation will not only impact women's life, but impact everybody's life. It's true that women are the main victim, because over the past 20 years, women progress in Afghanistan have been a matter of revenge between the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan and international community. So the situation might even, there will be backlashes, and there will be a deteriorating situation of everyone, including women of Afghanistan and women above all, and education also. In the negotiation, what we are trying to do is trying to preserve these common principles. Afghanistan that is on the basis of equity, Afghanistan that is on the principles of education for all, no discrimination among the citizens, inclusivity is our core value. These are the values that we are actually pushing during the negotiation. I hope that we will achieve, but I am sure that these are difficult subjects based on my 6 months of experience in the talks. We need international pressure for those.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fawzia Koofi, for your presentation, for being with us. It means a lot to us, and you have added a lot of important discussion, a lot of new avenues to this conference. Thank you so much for being here with us. Now, I request our next speaker, His Excellency, Mr. Dilshod Akhatov, Ambassador of Uzbekistan to India and former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan, to present his views at this conference. Kindly unmute yourself.
Is it okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
First of all, I express my gratitude to Tillotoma Foundation, personally to Dr. Das for the opportunity to deliver a speech on such an important topic, peace in Afghanistan. Uzbekistan, being one of the closest neighbors of Afghanistan, is interested in the earliest possible stabilization of the situation in this country, improvement of the well-being of its long-suffering people that has a direct impact on the situation in Central Asia. For several decades, the leadership of Uzbekistan has been calling on the world community to cooperate in achieving peace in Afghanistan and taking active steps on this direction, as well as through mediation of authoritative international organizations. In the last few years alone, Uzbekistan hosted several rounds of talks on an inter-Afghan settlement and a number of high-level international events on Afghanistan. Uzbekistan, realizing the existing great economic potential of bilateral and multilateral relations with Kabul, has put forward and is implementing a number of promising initiatives on this direction. In March, for example, in March 2018, a high-level international conference on Afghanistan peace process, security cooperation and regional interaction was held in Tashkent, in our capital city, and the adopted Tashkent Declaration on Afghanistan was circulated as an official document of the 72nd session of the General Assembly of United Nations and the United Nations Security Council. This international conference became a starting point in the process of launching a political process for a peaceful settlement in Afghanistan, searching for mutually acceptable forms and mechanisms of dialogues between interested parties. During a pandemic, various cargoes are continuously delivered to Afghanistan. Uzbekistan has repeatedly sent humanitarian aid to neighbor country consisting of food, essential goods and medicines. Active interaction between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan is also facilitated by the previously established direct flights with Kabul, the creation of an educational center for training Afghan youth in Termes, as well as the opening of the Consulate General of Afghanistan there in Termes. In August 2020, a 10-year agreement was signed in Tashkent on the supply of electricity from Uzbekistan to Afghanistan. Uzbekistan is a member of the support group, actively contributed to the launch of the inclusive inter-Afghan talks, which took place in September 2020 in Doha. I especially want to note the initiative of the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, His Excellency Shavkat Mirziyoyev, to develop and adopt a plan of measures to promote the socio-economic reconstruction of Afghanistan within the framework of the contact group with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization announced during the 19th summit of the heads of the member states in November 2020. Thanks to the efforts of the world community, promising prospects for a peaceful settlement of the conflict have emerged in Afghanistan. We are convinced that the peaceful, sustainable development of our neighbor will be facilitated by its involvement in regional trade and economic processes as a consistent continuing state of Central Asia. Today, more than ever, it is important not to seize all the opportunities to achieve the long-awaited peace in Afghanistan. Security and peace in this country should be seen as an important component of stability and economic prosperity for the entire West development of the Central Asian region, as well as President of Uzbekistan in his speech at the 75th anniversary session of the United Nations General Assembly paid special attention to Afghanistan. He said that it's important to work on the principle of from instability and destruction to peace and prosperity. To this end, he proposed to establish a permanent UN commission on Afghanistan that would address the concerns of long-suffering Afghan people. The main task of this commission is to promote and facilitate the economic and social development of Afghanistan. Uzbekistan is focused on the strategic opportunities that are opening up today as Afghanistan moves towards peace. Objectively, peace in our neighbor is a guarantee of the development not only of this country itself, but also of all states of Central Asia, the expansion of their multi-level contacts with neighboring countries. For many centuries, Afghanistan has served as a link between Central Asia and South Asia. People and goods continuously flowed through this territory. With the prospects of peace, all the necessary preconditions are being laid for Afghanistan to revive its historical role as a natural bridge united Central and South Asia. Today, Afghanistan opens a direct and shortest way to the countries of Central Asia, to the ports of Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf. In turn, through Afghanistan, the South Asian countries gain access to the markets of the CIS, Europe, and China. At the present, we are working on Mazar-e-Sharif, Kabul, Peshawar railway construction to exceed to the seaports of Pakistan, as well as on the route Mazar-e-Sharif, Herat, with access to the seaport of Iran, Chabahar. In order to intensify political and experts discussions that will precede the subsequent development of new project of bilateral and multilateral interaction with Afghanistan and its early involvement in regional social and economic programs. In July, Uzbekistan organized the international conference, Central and South Asia, Regional Connectivity, Challenges and Opportunities. The initiative to strengthen regional connectivity was proposed by the President of Uzbekistan in the context of Tashkent's new foreign policy strategy and at transforming Central Asia into a region of security, stability, and sustainable development integrated into the world economy. Thanks to the joint efforts of the Central Asian states in recent years, fundamental positive changes have taken place in the region, which can be seen in the strengthening of good neighborly relations, strategic partnership, and all-round mutually beneficial cooperation. During the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly, the President of Uzbekistan proposed to create a regional center for the development of transport and communication interconnection under auspices of the United Nations, the ensure deep integration of our region into global economic and transport corridors. A key link in regional connectivity between Central Asia and South Asia is Afghanistan, seen as an integral part of our common region. Today, new strategic opportunities are opening up for the integration of Afghanistan into international infrastructure projects and the development of transport corridors that are designed to connect the Central Asian countries with the South Asian region. Implementation of strategically important infrastructure projects, including the creation of Trans-Afghan corridor with access to seaports in the Indian Ocean. We believe that the prospects for obtaining economic benefits from the projects will strengthen the interests of both the intra-Afghan conflict participants and external actors in the peaceful settlement of the Afghan crisis in the early stabilization of the situation. Ultimately, not only our country and the Central Asian region, but also the entire international community will benefit from the development and reconstruction of Afghanistan. I'm sure that today's discussions and exchange of opinions will be very useful within the aspiration of world community for achieving the long-lasting and sustainable peace in Afghanistan. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your excellent presentation on the approach of Uzbekistan to the situation in Afghanistan and all that is being done in this regard by Uzbekistan. Thank you so much for being here with us. Due to personal reasons, Her Excellency Dr. Habiba Sarabi could not be here with us. We now move on to Ambassador Vivek Katju, former Indian ambassador to Afghanistan, and request him to present his views and particularly the Indian perspective to the situation in Afghanistan.
Thank you for inviting me to this seminar. My thanks also to the Tillotoma Foundation for this invitation. I will be presenting my views. Thankfully, I am not required, since I'm retired. I retired almost 10 years ago. Not required or in a position to present the views of the government of India. I'm sure that there are competent spokespeople of the government who can do so. But I will certainly give you the perspectives that I see developing in the Afghan situation. It is almost certain now that US and NATO troops will leave Afghanistan by 11 September. I underline the word almost here because as someone who has been following developments in Afghanistan for over 25 years, both in a professional capacity and once I left government service as an interested follower of events in Afghanistan, I have come to the conclusion that one must always expect the unexpected when it comes to the Afghanistan situation. However, having said that, if I was a betting man, I would bet heavily on President Joe Biden fulfilling the commitments he has now made to the American people and other NATO countries too of leaving Afghanistan militarily. There is a plan which the Americans have outlined for a peace process. The peace process, in a manner of speaking, as we were very competently informed by Ms. Koofi, was operationalized in September last year, and discussions have been going on between the Afghan parties. There is an expectation that the next round of these discussions would take place in Turkey, in Istanbul. However, the Taliban, as we all know, have as yet not given a firm indication that they will go to Istanbul. In fact, if anything, they have indicated otherwise, taking the plea that they will not leave, that they will not take part in any discussions on Afghanistan's future with Afghan parties till foreign troops leave Afghanistan. But again, if I was a betting man, I would bet, perhaps not as heavily as I would bet on American troops leaving, but I would bet nevertheless that before the troops leave, American forces and NATO forces leave Afghanistan, the Taliban will begin discussions with Kabul, and perhaps they will extract some concessions from the Americans to return to the negotiating table. but certainly they will come. To my mind, that is my expectation. It may get delayed till Eid or after Eid, so that remains to be seen. The third thing that I see at the moment, which I have noticed, is President Ghani's firm feeling and his announcement that his government will remain and remain firm, even if and even after the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. To my mind, the problem is not about the cohesion of President Ghani's government. The problem, as I see, is the cohesion of the what I call the Kabul elite. It is no secret that there are different sections of opinion which form the Kabul elite, and it is significant that it is not the government of Afghanistan per se, which is in discussions with the Taliban, but as Ms. Koofi put it, it is the Republic of Afghanistan which is discussing these matters, or delegation consisting of the Republic of Afghanistan, which is in discussions, which have been interrupted now, with the Taliban. And to my mind, it is absolutely necessary, if there is a measure of equality to come in these discussions, for a cohesiveness to emerge in the Kabul political class or the Kabul political elite. That is something that I think the Kabul political class owes to the Afghan people. But am I sanguine that this cohesion will be achieved? If I were a betting man, would I put a lot of money on a bet that this cohesion would be achieved? I regret to say that I would not. Because of the divisions in Kabul, I do think the Taliban have an advantage. Because the Taliban, as I see it, are far more cohesive than the team or the elements of the Kabul elite whose representatives are there. Now, I am aware of the fact that there has been an attempt of merging different opinions which exist in Kabul about Afghanistan's future, about the ceasefire, about power sharing, the kind to ensure that a united position emerges when it comes to discussions with the Taliban. However, the real thing to my mind is, if political cohesion would remain in Kabul once the Americans leave. And the next question which flows from this question relating to political cohesion is the issue of the unity of the Afghan security forces. I'm not suggesting that the Afghan security forces are in danger of disintegrating, but I do think that if the Kabul political elite does not remain united after the withdrawal of American and NATO forces, then that lack of cohesion and lack of unity will necessarily impact on the national security forces of Afghanistan. That is the lesson of history. And I don't think we can overlook the lessons of history. We should not try to repeat what happened in history, which was to such a disadvantage of Afghanistan, the Afghan people, and the region. But we have to be realistic in approaching these matters. So the real issue, as I see in Afghanistan today, is one, as and when discussions begin, and I've struck my neck out to say that I do think that even before the withdrawal of American forces and NATO forces, discussions between the Afghan parties will begin. But in these discussions, how much flexibility, to use the word which Ms. Koofi used, is shown by different sides. Because if flexibility is not shown by the Taliban or by Kabul, if accommodative processes are not adopted, then I do think that we will be faced with an extremely difficult situation in Afghanistan. Now, I'm mindful that 2021 and the decade we are in now is not the same as the decade of the 1990s. But having professionally worked on Afghanistan in the Indian Ministry of External Affairs from the middle of that decade, I'm aware of the enormous troubles that were present in Afghanistan and in the region in those decades. I can sincerely hope, as a friend of Afghanistan and a friend of the Afghan people, that wisdom will be shown as we proceed further, that this wisdom would be shown not only by the Afghan parties, by the Taliban, who need to be realistic and not exultant, because exultation will not yield them will not yield them anything great or substantive. If they feel that politically and militarily they have the upper hand at this time, then that should bring about a greater sense of responsibility. My last point is that clearly the international community has indicated that there cannot be a return to the Islamic Emirate as it existed in Afghanistan in the mid-90s up to the time when the Taliban were thrown out of Afghanistan following military action. That is something which the Taliban should really listen to. This is the voice of the international community. They should listen to that voice, and on its part, the Kabul elite must show flexibility to craft a way forward on constitutional issues which will ensure the development or the evolution of a consensus in Afghanistan. But before all that, there has to be an agreement on power sharing and a ceasefire. My very last point is that I'm pessimistic about the Taliban agreeing to a ceasefire unless there is a power sharing arrangement, and the complexities and difficulties of a power sharing arrangement are enormous. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Katju, for your words on Afghanistan and how you see the peace process. I would request Dr. Awad to make his questions.
Thank you, Soham. The Ambassador, I think India is considered to be one of the major stakeholders in Afghanistan, have contributed more than $3 billion for the infrastructure projects and helping the rebuilding of Afghanistan. But I think one of the major concerns is the security and return of terrorism into the region. As an ambassador, as a foreign policy observer and watching nowadays, how do you see India role in Afghanistan if the United States and the allies leave the country and leave that vacuum, and taking in consideration the rivalry between India and Pakistan in dealing with Afghanistan?
I do think that India's assistance program in Afghanistan has been extremely successful. I think it is a popular program because it is very descriptive. It has sought to address the needs of the Afghan people in a manner that they want those needs to be addressed. And it is my expectation that to the extent possible, India would continue with that assistance program. I would imagine that the government of India would be extremely concerned about the kind of situations that can develop in Afghanistan following a withdrawal. And that as a friend of Afghanistan, it would want peace and stability to return at the quickest. Now, as far as India is concerned, I think it has always been in favor of Afghanistan pursuing an independent foreign policy, an independent policy regarding its own development. It has been a firm conviction within India, not only of the present government, but of all governments, that as a sovereign, independent country, the choices that the government of Afghanistan, any government of Afghanistan makes, have to be its own choices, and these choices should not be under pressure, leave alone coercion, coming from any court. I think India would like to adhere to this. That is. I, for one, and now I'm speaking in a personal capacity, believe that it is good that India will be there if the American proposal for a UN peace conference where some neighbors of Afghanistan will be present along with China and Russia, and China is a neighbor of Afghanistan. Then I believe that it is necessary for India to be in open contact with all Afghan parties. This does not mean any endorsement or approval of the principles or programs of any party. Far from it. India cannot ever, I believe the people of India would never be on all fours with the principles which, for instance, the Taliban espoused. Some of the principles that the Taliban espoused. But that does not mean that India should not be in contact, open contact with all parties. I think that is in India's national interest, as it is in the national interest of Afghanistan and of all Afghan people.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Katju, for your response. Now I request Dr. Singh Roy to make her question. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Das. It's always pleasure listening to Sir. I've been in touch with him for a very long time, and of course, his pragmatic approach is something which is always, which draws our attention to your statements. Sir, one point that I would like you to elaborate particularly, you brought out very distinctly two important points, and so did Ms. Koofi. Flexibility and consensus. And I think these are two words which can really change the future of what is going to be unfolding in Afghanistan. Here, what are the options for India? Particularly, I'm referring to now that India has shown willingness to talk to all factions, including, to an extent, there is an indication that there's no harm in talking to Talibans as well. That's some kind of an indication. Now, we also see, Iran, Pakistan, Russia, China, having some sort of consensus. In Russia, India was not invited initially, but now the Americans have pushed us. What is the regional consensus? I don't think, I see the common, even if we are talking to the Iranians, for example, the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, and of course, the Pakistan factor is completely different. I mean, there's also report that, there's been a backdoor, some kind of a discussion between Pakistan and India. Now, how far do you see any kind of a, discussion and, back channel or otherwise communication between India and Pakistan? I know it's very difficult to sort of say at this point in time, but given your experience, I'm sure you would have some nuanced sort of approach to this. Thank you, sir.
Please unmute yourself.
Forgive me. You asked me two broad questions. The first relates to India, Afghanistan. What should India do in Afghanistan? I tried to answer it partially in response to the previous question put to me. And the second area that you focused on is India-Pakistan. Let me take the second thing first straight away. There have been reports of back channel discussions between India and Pakistan. And I, for one, do feel that, and I've written about this in some articles that I wrote, that the DGMO statement that came out quite clearly showed a diplomatic touch to it. It was not a military-to-military statement. It was a government-to-government statement issued by the militaries. And therefore, that itself showed that some back-channel discussions were taking place. Now, how far would these discussions go? I, for one, feel that there is a tussle going on within Pakistan on its India policy. And there have been indications of this, not very strong indications, but enough indications for analysts to pick up, to see or to estimate that this is a contentious issue. So really, it depends on how far would Pakistan be willing to go in trying to what the UAE ambassador to the US said, develop a healthy, functional relationship with it. The ball lies in Pakistan's court, as it has always been in. It's up to them to make out, because from India's viewpoint, it has always indicated to Pakistan that it is committed and would like a functional relationship, because that is between neighbors, and especially between two neighbors like India and Pakistan. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, the real issue in Afghanistan, as far as to my mind, is a Pakistani obsession of India encircling them through Afghanistan. This is completely far there in the Pakistani mind, and there is nothing that India really can do to get it out of the Pakistani. So again, the onus is on Pakistan to develop an approach to Afghanistan, which, while taking care of Pakistan's security interests, and they have security interests, we must acknowledge that, but while taking care of security interests, not to impinge on Afghanistan's independence of action. This is the real problem, or one of the problems in Afghanistan, and I do believe it is Pakistan's power to address it rationally. I was struck very forcefully by what Pakistan Foreign Minister Qureshi said recently in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, while speaking to the press. And if that is something that Pakistan now believes, then there is perhaps a very, very slight glimmer of hope. But then in Indo-Pak relations, I've realized always that realism dictates that one doesn't take these glimmers of hope as something solid. They are glimmers, and only glimmers, they can get extinguished at any time. Because unless the Pakistanis, and this is my final point, unless the Pakistanis are able to abandon this firm idea that India is a permanent enemy, they will not be able to get things right, either within Pakistan or in their neighborhood.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Katju, for your words, for answering the questions and for the discussion. So now we have heard from the practitioners and from the excellencies. Now we will have a series of speakers who are analysts and who shall deliberate on the finer aspects of the problem. We will have Dr. Christian Wagner, Senior Fellow, German Institute for International and Security Affairs, Berlin. We will have Mr. Vishal Chandra, Research Fellow, MP-IDSA. We will have Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor in Chinese Studies, School of International Studies, JNU, and Mr. Apratim Mukarji, Senior International Journalist and Author. So I first request Dr. Wagner to make his presentation.
Thank you very much. So, first of all, let me thank Tillotoma Foundation for having me. The first doesn't look very good on my side, but I will just continue with my presentation, and I hope at least you can get and also have the discussion with representative from Afghanistan, as well as with my Indian colleagues whom I know since many years. What I will do here in the following, just very briefly, because as I represent the German think tank and also a little bit I will look at the European situation, I think this is or will become much more an outsider's view. When we intervention, and as it has already been mentioned, it will also change the nature of the conflict in Afghanistan. It will be put more pressure on the government, will put greater responsibility for the regional powers. It will also change, let's say, the nature of Germany's and Europe's engagement. We will no longer be security providers, but we will have to focus on new roles in order to support Afghanistan's peaceful development. This is first on the economic side, supporting Afghanistan in its reconstruction for what I will do in the following very briefly, look a little bit at Germany's contribution so far, and then focus a little bit on the regional challenges, but I think my Indian colleagues will do this in a much bigger way. So the first point about Germany, I mean, now that it's clear that German troops will also withdraw from Afghanistan, we will also have a debate in Germany and in Europe about the success and the failure. Germany has something between 900 and 1,000 soldiers in Afghanistan. So far, Germany has lost 59 soldiers, and the costs for the military deployment have been estimated to be about 12 billion euros. But Germany was also very heavily involved in the peace process in Afghanistan. Many of you may remember that the Bonn conference in 2001 was also the starting point for the international political engagement, and Germany was also in cooperation with the government of Qatar, has initiated dialogues between representatives of the Afghan civil society and the Taliban, and Germany has always been active to support talks between the conflict parties. So I think these are good reasons when you will make the point that Germany and Europe will continue to be close partners of Afghanistan in the future. We will also have to do substantial for the development and 180 million for the stabilization of Afghanistan, and Germany has made already strong commitments to support the training of the Afghan security forces until 2024. Germany has also been among the largest providers in the building of police, the legal system, and the administration. Moreover, there has always been a strong focus on civil society, especially women and children rights and collaboration in higher education. We have seen some progress on many fronts in Afghanistan in recent years, even if let's say the international picture, and some of you have already referred to, let's say, their negative outlook is not always so positive. But nevertheless, the overall situation in Afghanistan has improved. The mortality rates of children came down by 50%, and more people than ever before got access to electricity and drinking water. Overall, per capita incomes have also risen from $120 to more than $600. The EU has also been used its mission in Afghanistan to get a better profile as a security provider. EU has been in charge of the police mission, and it has pledged another 1.2 billion euros for the next 4 years. But of economic support in the past, that this will also be an important leverage for Germany and European countries in the future. Even if we see a breakdown of the government and another takeover by the Taliban, I think they would also need external economic assistance for the reconstruction. Moreover, or especially so if they want to peace process will have disastrous consequences, not only for the people in Afghanistan, but also for neighboring countries with an increase in the refugee numbers. So this brings me to very briefly to my second point, the challenges for a regional approach. The debate about the role of neighbors in the Afghan conflict has always been a very integral part. Ambassador Katju has just mentioned Indo-Pakistan rivalry, very much different regional initiatives, for instance, the Heart of Asia and the Heart of Asia Conference or the Istanbul process, but also the Regional Economic Cooperation Conference on Afghanistan. In 2020, German government also launched a Green Central Asia initiative so that Central Asian countries and Afghanistan can tackle the common challenges of climate change and security. What we are now seeing when we compare the debate about the regional framework that was already there some 5 to 10 years ago. With the present parts of Central Asia, it has recently made an agreement with Iran. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is the largest project in the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think this time the regional debate will be probably center much more in how far China is willing to take over its role or to take a new role in Afghanistan, and in how far this is accepted not only by the Afghan. Keep in mind, and I think we will have more debates with Chinese scholars again on their views in how far they can contribute or in how far they will be able to bring in investment and also positive or hopefully positive economic benefits for Afghanistan. So let me come to the conclusion. Well, as I said in the beginning, what we will see once the troops the NATO troops have withdrawn, we will see a fundamental change in the role that Germany and Europe will have in Afghanistan. So far, we have been both. I think there have been long-term commitments with the present Afghan governments to support the reconstruction. So the roadmap, and one should also always keep in mind that the roadmap to peace as country. And I think in this area, I will see the major contribution of Germany, Europe, and other partners of the Afghan government in the international community to contribute to the peace process and the economic development for the Afghan people. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christian Wagner, for your presentation. You highlighted the German perspective on the Afghan issue. Next, we will come to Mr. Vishal Chandra, Research Fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. So,
am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank the Tillotoma Foundation for inviting me to share my personal views, my own perception about the evolving situation in Afghanistan. I think Dr. Awad, somewhere at the beginning of the seminar, raised a very pertinent query when he asked why President Ghani, an elected government who heads an elected government, was kept out of the talks at Doha. And that reminded me of a very interesting statement, perhaps a very frank assessment of the kind of challenges that Afghan leaders, successive Afghan leaders, have been facing since decades. When during a conference in Kabul in 2017, he said, and I'm quoting him, "We have tried bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, and even multilateral negotiations to bring an end to the conflict and terror. But we have made little progress. We want peace with Pakistan. We want to be able to trust Pakistan, and we want the chance for friendly cooperative relationship that will reduce poverty and promote growth on both sides of the Durand line. Our problem, our challenge is that we cannot figure out what is it that Pakistan wants. What will it take to convince Pakistan that a stable Afghanistan helps them and helps our region?" I think that was a very interesting observation coming from President Ghani, someone who had mainstreamed the idea of peace with the Taliban right from 2014 onward. But he was kept out of the, an elected president was kept out of the dialogue, the process, peace process, so-called peace process that began at Doha in 2018. So what has Doha agreement basically achieved? Well, I'm not very sure if there's still a peace process in Afghanistan. I think what Americans now are talking about is basically starting a new political process. It's not about a peace process in my personal view. I think Doha agreement, if one has to look at the very quickly at the advantages or the positive side of it, I think it met the core demands or core concerns of both the United States and the Taliban. So United States got assurances that areas under Taliban control or the Afghan soil would not be allowed to be used against the interest of the United States and its allies, which is a good pretext to start drawing down troops. Americans, of course, came out with a very timetabled, which has been a part of the American discourse, it seems, since 2010-11, since President Obama's time, timetabled withdrawal process, which now has been extended from May 1st to September. But to an extent, the 1.5-year-long negotiation process has successfully drawn Taliban onto the negotiating table, something which Americans and others had failed since 2009 and 10. Third positive side was, which in my view was most important, was that for the first time, Taliban representatives and members of the Afghan political elite and civil society and women activists were talking and interacting, not negotiating in my personal opinion. They were talking and interacting for the first time face to face. What were the disadvantages? I think Doha process and the Doha agreement successfully, and this has worked to the advantage of both Pakistan and let's say the Taliban Haqqani leadership, because we are talking of, when we talk about Taliban, Haqqani now is part of the Taliban leadership structure. So we are talking of Taliban Haqqani network here. So I think Doha agreement has successfully diverted the international attention from Pakistan, particularly Pakistan's role inside Afghanistan. Pakistan continues to maintain the training infrastructure for the Taliban and various hues of militant groups on east of the Durand line. So there's hardly any discussion, hardly any international focus or attention on Pakistan, what Pakistan has been or is still doing in South. So that was a major diversion in my opinion. Secondly, until a couple of months back, the kind of deliberations that were taking place, or let's say the points of discussion and debate, including in social media, particularly from younger Afghans or Afghans who are into politics, was Islamic Emirate versus Islamic Republic. Now, Doha agreement, and with Pakistan presenting itself in a very benign role of a facilitator, again has diluted, seems to have diluted this, this Islamic Republic versus Islamic Emirate debate or discourse that was on. So now it's more about Islamic Emirate and something that is still versus something that is still unknown to us. Third, I think the third point is we do not really still have a very good idea if if Afghanistan cannot be an Islamic Emirate, then what kind of a political system is being negotiated or proposed, whereby the aspirations of a cross-section of Afghans, whereby the social and political diversity of Afghanistan, which the current political system has been able to accommodate with some success, or rather I would say with great success compared to earlier political systems that Afghanistan had 1973 and 78 onwards. So it is difficult to imagine a political system which could be more representative, which could be more broad-based than the current political system. So I haven't come across any proposal whereby an alternate political system or a structure which can reflect the contemporary realities, which is the social and political diversity, the pluralism of Afghanistan. So that is a huge gray area, and I think one would have to wait and watch the kind of debates that would take place, or the kind of deliberations that would take place during and after the conference in Istanbul. My next observation is regarding the Taliban. Now, I'm not very sure to what extent Taliban are independent enough to negotiate with the Afghan government and the other groups in Istanbul or later in Doha, because they have refused to attend as of now. But I won't be surprised if they do, because I have seen reports, and perhaps people from Afghanistan, representatives from Afghanistan can confirm, where they have said that if couple of more thousands of Taliban prisoners are released, or if some are delisted, perhaps they could be open to the idea of continuing with the negotiations, or letting Americans delay their withdrawal without raking up violence. Now, I think Doha process and the Istanbul conference is proving to be a divisive point within the Taliban. There are different voices. There are various shuras, and as they captured territories, as their influence grew, so along with it, the competition among various groups, various shuras, definitely must have grown. So I think it's going to be very difficult, even if one assumes that a section of political leadership, the older leadership back from the 90s, they might have realized the value of diplomacy. They have to an extent, and they might have realized how frustrating it was for them not to gain international recognition, how frustrating it must have been not to get international aid and assistance back in the 90s. And they probably understand that they need to accommodate other political groups, and perhaps that is required in order to ensure that they get international legitimacy and international aid, which should be required if they were to join the political process, if they were to join the government. But at the same time, it's going to be difficult for them to sell this idea of electoral democracy to the more militant, let's say, the irreconcilable, or the ones which are far more closely aligned, including the Haqqani network with the Pakistani intelligence. So I do not really see any much scope at the moment for progress as far as these talks or interactions are concerned. Certainly not unless a group of Taliban which believes that it's time for them to find ways to reconcile to the social and political diversity of Afghanistan, to find ways to cater to the aspirations of the Afghanistan that emerged post 2001, including the aspirations of the youth. So I do not foresee any major progress as far as these talks and interactions are concerned. At the regional level, I think we can take note of a certain consensus that there is no military solution. There has to be a negotiated way forward. There is no place for Islamic Emirate. There is no going back to the 1990s. I think there is a growing realization within the region that a stronger message needs to be sent out to Taliban and their backers east of the Durand line, that Taliban can be part of the future of Islamic Republic. They can be part of the future of Afghanistan, but they themselves cannot be the future of the country. Coming to India's role, I think Ambassador Katju has very nicely, in detail, he is very well analyzed, and I completely agree with him. All I would like to refer to is External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar's latest statement, one of the latest statements, where he said that Afghanistan needs double peace, where he talked about peace around Afghanistan and peace within Afghanistan. I think that very much reflects our own experience and understanding about Afghanistan, since 70s and 80s. So I think what he has said makes perfect sense in the current context. There has to be an understanding, and I can see, though I might sound little naive, but I do feel, this is my personal view, that in months to come, we could be seeing greater coordination between some of the neighboring countries, between India and some of the neighboring countries. For Pakistan, apart from, a lot has been said about Taliban violence. I think, again, that was a good diversion from the Pakistan's point of view, because the focus has shifted to what Taliban are doing inside Afghanistan, what is happening west of Durand Line, rather than what Pakistan has been trying to do east of Durand Line, because they need to find ways to keep thousands of their fighters engaged, and at the same time, the hardcore elements, in the sense, those who are opposed, or let's say the anti-talks, which is a very influential section, because most of these younger military commanders, frontline commanders, obviously are closely aligned to the military commission than to the political shura, so they too need to be kept under check. But that's probably the internal dynamics of the Taliban. But coming back to India very quickly, I think India would continue to assist Afghanistan in ways that would not complicate things for Kabul, or for both Kabul and New Delhi. And I would like to wind up my presentation by referring to a statement which I believe well reflects our position about the kind of so-called peace processes that we are seeing in Afghanistan. The statement was made by India's permanent representative to the UN back in March 2002, where our representative had said, "It is important to listen carefully to what the Afghans need and respect their priorities and preferences, as no one knows better than the Afghans what is good for them and how best to do it." He had cautioned the international community against the temptation to foist solutions or structures not suitable or responsive to the local environment, since it will neither serve the cause of the donors nor of the Afghans. And he further argued that in determining what will work, sustainability should be the touchstone. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind patience. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chandra, for your detailed presentation on the issue in Afghanistan and the various perspectives, the US perspective, the Indian perspective, and the way international community looks at the situation in Afghanistan. I now invite Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, professor in Chinese studies at the School of International Studies, JNU, to make his intervention, where he would mainly focus on the way China looks at Afghanistan. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Das, and let me also thank the Tillotoma Foundation for inviting me for this interaction. Well, as you know, the Chinese concerns on the ongoing negotiations for restoration of peace in Afghanistan, they are manifold. But once the decision or announcement was made for the withdrawal of troops by the US from September this year, the Chinese activities at the bilateral and multilateral are expected to be intensified. Already since 2014, they have been making a lot of inroads. I think this would be further intensified, as it happened also with the Taliban making secret visits to Beijing and other efforts that China had made, both at the bilateral and the multilateral levels. So the Chinese concern is fundamentally about Xinjiang, because Xinjiang borders Afghanistan for over 76 kilometers in the Wakhan corridor. And this position of Afghanistan in South, Central, and West Asia is crucial for them because they launched the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. And Afghanistan has been part of the BRI, although at a very low key level rather than the Pakistani role in CPEC, which is very crucial for China and had invested heavily. We see the BRI in Afghanistan is only cosmetic at this point of time. So still BRI is important for China, especially as it links Afghanistan and to the rest of West Asia, Pakistan, and other countries. The third factor is obviously minerals, because Afghanistan is estimated to be sitting on more than $1 trillion of minerals. And since 2008, Metallurgical Corporation of China deal with the Afghanistan government on the Ainak copper mine with $3.5 billion investment here. Since then, there has been a number of initiatives that China made, both in terms of the infrastructure as well as in iron and steel projects in Bamiyan. Then there is the oil contracts that they signed in Amu Darya and other places. Obviously, the main factor here is how to usher in stability in Xinjiang, which has seen various reports of over 1 million incarcerated in the camps. This campaign for the past 3 years has been intensified. And Blinken's comment recently about the withdrawal of troops connected to China also raises that issue of Xinjiang, which of course has over 13 to 14 groups in various formations. The ETIM, ETIP, TIP, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, Islamic Party, Islamic groups, they have been trained in the Fatah region. Since the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the Chinese military intelligence trained several thousands of mujahideen. Xiong Kuangkai, who served as the deputy chief of general staff, he writes in his book about over 350 instructors from the military intelligence training the mujahideen to counter the Soviets. Now, this gives a huge leverage for China, not just with the Pakistani ISI, but also with the groups in Afghanistan, including the Al-Qaeda and others, especially with the Haqqani network. There are reports about China interacting with the Haqqani network and possibly a deal in a post-ISAF, post-American troops withdrawal. This is likely to happen, a most likely scenario in the post-US troops withdrawal scenario by this year end. China's other major concern is border stability with social security, AIDS prevention and control issues, and drug trafficking. These are also issues of law and order. And through the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, China had put a lot of pressure. Afghanistan is an observer in the SCO process, and so there has been various dialogues and counterterrorism and law enforcement training programs that have been put up with the Afghans in the recent times. So in this background, China had cobbled up a number of agreements with Afghanistan, including the 2006 Good Neighborliness Policy, the 2012 Strategic Cooperative Partnership Agreement. Then they identified 5 pillars as part of the strategic partnership. In 2013, they had a joint statement on deepening such partnership. And President Ashraf Ghani made China as the first visit abroad in 2014. Since then, interactions have been intensified, including an MOU on Belt and Road Initiative and also on agreement on energy partnership agreements. China has also been floating a number of initiatives, as some speakers have already mentioned. The overall scheme is said to be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned. But it appears that China is heavily dependent on Pakistan. So it could be Pakistani guided rather than Afghan-owned, Afghan-led processes alone. So in this context, they have several multilateral, quadrilateral dialogues with a number of countries, especially including with Tajikistan, Nepal, and Pakistan, of course. The Istanbul process, China had hosted the fourth meeting in 2014, the same year that President Ghani visited. There is also the officials from the Doha office visiting Beijing secretly and discussing with China on the modalities of post-US troops withdrawal. This has been for the past 6-7 years, the negotiations. So we could assume that the discussions have been at a very mature level and likely to be implemented if the US troops indeed withdraw from Afghanistan. The agreement suggests, of course, the internal and the external aspects. Internal, the infrastructure, economic, and others, they have about a $1.2 billion trade and investments mainly in the minerals. But the Chinese concern is that the operating costs of the Chinese companies is increasing substantially because they have to deal not only with the central government agencies, but also with the militants and also local warlords in different regions. And they identified the southern and western provinces, 8 of them more dangerous for them. And so we could probably see the investments coming into the other areas. They have several proposals in this regard in working along with the local tribal communities, leaders, and so on. So in that background, we see that there is a concerted effort by China. Post US troops withdrawal, there are several scenarios that could be painted. From the Chinese point of view, obviously, they have suggested in soon after post 9/11 about the UN Charter being implemented. Secondly, ethnic reconciliation of various ethnic groups in Afghanistan and peaceful reconstruction in the war-torn region. So, of course, Chinese contribution for the reconstruction effort has been very minimal when we compare with the other countries, including India. Nevertheless, they have tied up these with the political leadership. And so we are likely to see more of those strings attached policies that China is likely to implement, number one. Number two, with the reports about a military base in Tajikistan borders coming up, it is likely that as in 9/11, when they deployed 24,000 troops to block any Taliban, Al-Qaeda intrusions into Xinjiang, it is likely that China will deploy forces in this region in order to counter the fallout from September this year. Already some missions have already been concluded in this region. And reports also suggested that they will probably deploy troops, but non-combat troops in the form of UN peacekeeping operations, as the South China Morning Post had indicated recently, which has eyes and ears from Beijing. A second scenario is if the Taliban controls Kabul and introduces the Islamic Emirate policies, more conservative ones, it is still likely that China will make a deal with the Taliban, much as they did in late 2000 when Ambassador Lu Shulin visited Kandahar to meet with Mullah Umar, it is likely that China is willing to make a tie-up with the future leadership in Kabul. And the deal obviously is China protects the Kabul government in lieu of their delinking from any terrorist activity in Xinjiang. This was the deal that Lu Shulin concluded with Mullah Umar in 2000, late 2000, November 2000. If the Taliban delinks from the Uyghur factor, then it is quite possible that China provides protection for the Taliban in the Security Council and other arenas in global as well as in regional formats. So that is a likely scenario that could emerge. As it happened with history in hindsight, we could say that this is one scenario that could happen. But if the delinking with international terrorism as the condition that was made by the US, both in Iraq as well as in Afghanistan, for the terrorist groups in lieu of the pacts that they have signed, if the Taliban dealings from international terrorism and looks at purely the domestic aspects, then it is likely that the Chinese role in Afghanistan would intensify, barring the concerns about the uncertainty about the investments. But if these are more lucrative, China is likely to do business with the Taliban in the foreseeable future, even in the commercial and other aspects. China delinking from the education, from social welfare or other schemes, which may enrage the Taliban. So China could possibly make that kind of a deal with any government in Kabul in the near future. At the moment, they have supported the law and order agencies with over $70 million of assistance, but this is in the light of the 6 attacks that happened on the Chinese individuals, citizens, etc., in Afghanistan so far, in various places, in the infrastructure projects or in other areas. So this could also be a basic condition between China and a futuristic government in Kabul. So whichever way we see this scenario, we see that the Chinese goalposts have changed substantially in the recent times, but the main concerns are obviously on stability in Xinjiang. There is also the issue related to BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, on which they have huge investments made, and most importantly, the connection to the West Asia, South Asia, as well as to Central Asia. So the goalposts have shifted from mere stability, which is important for the Chinese, but also to consolidation efforts in law and order, border management practices, and so on. The second goalpost that has changed is while they were trying to replace the Soviets in Afghanistan in the last several decades since 1989, it is now how to replace the US influence in Afghanistan. So that is another goalpost that the Chinese are working on. Finally, there is also the party congresses, Communist Party congresses see Afghanistan as part of their strategic opportunities. And hence, it is likely that the might of the state-owned enterprises and along with that the law and order agencies of China are likely to penetrate Afghanistan in increasing numbers from late this year. So let me stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Kondapalli, for your detailed presentation on China's perspective to the Afghanistan issue, their investments and what they think in future. You have sort of decoded the Chinese psyche towards Afghanistan. Thank you so much. Next, we come to someone who has very detailed experience on Afghanistan, Mr. Apratim Mukarji, international journalist and author. We will hear from him. Please unmute yourself and begin. Unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, when I started hearing this very interesting and detailed discussion this afternoon or evening, I was in a dark mood. The subject of Afghanistan has always put me in a dark mood. I've never been happy while reading about it, or visiting the country, or writing about it. But today, after I listened to Ms. Koofi and Ambassador uh, Katju, I found that my mood was changing. I was changing over from pessimism to optimism, and I came across this magic mantra of flexibility and consensus. Obviously, when you deal with an impossible entity like the Taliban, you have to be optimistic. There's no point in starting with pessimism and trying to grope your way forward, which would be impossible to attain. So I find that my pessimism is rather misplaced, and even though both Ms. Koofi and Ambassador Katju have cautioned that dealing with the Taliban has never been easy, has never been predictable, and therefore you must be on your guard. I still find that probably this time, with so much at stake, probably Afghanistan will be on its way to peace. However fragile it might be in the beginning, but probably this phase may stay, may hold on. I am beginning with this note of optimism. Now, being a journalist, I build my portrait of a country on small details, on individuals I meet, on incidents I witness while visiting a country. And therefore, here I remember one incident which I witnessed on my first visit to the country after the Taliban had fallen. That was January of 2002. Along with my Tillotoma, the translator, I was crossing across the biggest bazaar in Kabul when we found there was a small gathering somewhere and a lot of shouts were going on and a boy was beating up a girl. Everybody was standing and looking at. My companion, the Zuma, suddenly got very enraged and he went up to the boy and the girl, stopped the boy, and started beating him up in return. This again made everybody aghast and they wanted to know what he was doing. He said, look, Afghanistan has changed. The Taliban have gone. You can't beat a girl just because she is in a market unaccompanied by a male. She has every right to be here as much as her brother does. What's the difference between the boy and the girl? So this question has not yet been resolved in Afghanistan. Ms. Koofi and Ms. Sarabi are witness to this continuing misogyny in Afghan society. They have to fight at every step. And their fights combine are building up the new society that Afghanistan is seeking to build. I remember another incident which happened during the Taliban rule when a woman was beaten up very badly and left to die in the street because she was walking alone. When she recovered in hospital, she told the police that she was forced to walk alone because her father had died in a fight with the Taliban. Her husband was killed by the Taliban. Her brother was killed by the Taliban. Her son was killed by the Taliban. And she was all alone in her family. Now she wanted to buy food. She wanted to buy medicine. And that's why she was on the street. And this was the result. She was left to die. Now, Ms. Koofi writes in a famous book, The Favored Daughter, that when she was born, she was left to die in the sun because nobody wanted girl child. But she did not die. And on the other hand, she has become one of the most famous women in the world, one of the famous women in world history. And she is rightly honored. I now quote from the citation for the Magsaysay Award, which was awarded to Ms. Sarobi. There are few places in the world where the challenge of governance is as daunting as in Afghanistan. Now, as I was listening to the discussions today by the politicians, the diplomats, the academics, I was being reminded of this sentence that ultimately what we are discussing this evening is the question of governance. How to govern Afghanistan as a modern nation state. For one thing, the question has never been settled whether Afghanistan is actually a modern nation state. Isn't it still a conglomeration of diverse clannish worlds, all living within their own worlds, all based on clans, all on tribes? So many tribes make up the nation. And it isn't a modern nation in that sense at all. It is still tribe. It is still governed by tribal loyalties. So these are some of the challenges that governance in Afghanistan entails. So when we talk about the peace process, when we hope that ultimately a peace agreement will be signed, ultimately a new government will come, in which the civil society, the political class, the political elite, as Ambassador Katju has referred so many times, and the Taliban, they all work together, they all govern together. Is this an idyllic situation? Is this just a dream? Or is this an achievable dream? I shall conclude quickly with the hope that this will be another achievable dream. Even though, like others, I must also conclude with the uh, with the with this, that we can never believe a successful, that is the important thing, a successful terrorist group which has always profited by violating every law, every norm of normal human behavior, every human right. How can we discipline such a force? And still, the dream is so big that we want to see that force, that evil force, that essentially evil force, will ultimately be a part. We can only hope that it won't be the only part or the most important part of the new government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Apratim Mukarji, for your presentation, where you shared your own experiences, your hope for the future. Thank you so much. Now we will move to a sort of open forum discussion with our speakers and the panelists and our discussants. Let me request Professor Ghoshal to sort of lead this discussion.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I think from the discussions and presentations, a few things emerge. As the time is very little, I think what I'll do, I will try to speak more telegraphically, not trying to elaborate each and every point as such. Now, one thing that really strikes me in any of these discussions, or my own belief in terms of the development in a particular country, that people have mentioned about Afghan owned and Afghan led. Now that's, I think, the basic thing, that no external power can really influence the political development in the country. It has to be done internally and with your own sort of, genius, whatever way it has. And that's why I think the question of consensus and flexibility actually come into the picture. Because in any kind of arrangement, consensus is very important, and so is flexibility. The moment that flexibility goes and the parties become rigid, no compromise can take place. Now, but that's, I think, a very demanding situation to my mind, because consensus and flexibility are again very rare commodities in some of the countries in our neighborhood or in most of the Asian countries, particularly in countries which had undergone a long period of conflict. In such a situation, consensus and flexibility becomes rather difficult. Now, why are we talking about, and I think another very important factor that impinges on Afghanistan, to my mind, and I'm trying to compare it with many other countries in the region. See, apart from the internal conflicts, if a particular country is involved with external members, where external countries have definite strategic objectives in those countries, I think situation becomes even more difficult. Although this cannot be compared, Afghanistan, or for that matter, Myanmar currently, but surely I think whatever is happening today in Myanmar also gives that lesson that you cannot really influence political developments from outside. What you can do is to build capacities, or you can help a particular country to come to a certain level of understanding. So I think the two most important things, as everyone has mentioned, is consensus and flexibility. And I'm a little pessimist, not just on Afghanistan, but looking at the countries in the entire region, parts of South Asia, parts of Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is slightly different because Confucius ideology, obeisance to authority and all that makes a little bit different. But in South Asia, if you include Afghanistan, consensus as well as, any kind of flexibility becomes a rare commodity. I think the second difficulty, all these arrangements or, the attitudes of other countries or the internal actors can be sort of factored in, things become difficult also because of certain other developments. Now, to my mind, for any kind of peaceful evolution of any kind of political system in the country, you have to also think about three different things. One is peace and stability, which is again very rare in Afghanistan. I think Afghanistan's situation approximates Hobbes's definition of state of nature: brutish, nasty, and sometimes even short. Life becomes short. So I think that's one condition. The second condition is that in any of this kind of situations where you have to evolve a new political arrangement, governance becomes an important factor. Now, from that particular indice or index, Afghanistan has not shown a very great record in terms of governance, corruption, mismanagement, misrule, all that has also characterized Afghanistan. So peace and stability, governance, and the third important factor is the economic situation in Afghanistan. Now, on all the three counts, I think Afghanistan's situation is quite unstable. Its economy is also not doing very well. So we can put all other arrangements in place, even if, say, Pakistan agrees to be flexible, tries to modify some of the attitudes of the Taliban, or if Taliban tries to accommodate some of the interests and all that, and the other external powers also try to reconcile the situation. I think unless and until you have a stable economy, in that kind of a crisis, it becomes very difficult to evolve any kind of arrangement. So I think the challenges are very daunting, very, very daunting. And to a certain extent, I think Ambassador Katju talked about somebody betting that if you would have been a person who would bet things. I also, I think, is more inclined to that kind of a view, that you can only bet what will happen. So I'm not that very sort of optimistic unless the internal dynamics make situation a little more congenial for other things to come closer to each other. So
thank you so much.
Dynamics is really that important. Yeah. So I think the three things are to be taken into consideration in any kind of assessment of road to peace in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ghoша. Now I request Dr. Meena Singh Roy to kindly pose the questions to the speakers, and also Dr. Awad. Please unmute yourself before.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Having listened to various, speeches, the discourse that we've had, on Afghanistan, it always brings you to the point, what next? And I think this is the major challenge. Today, if we see Afghanistan, I mean, whenever I've looked at Afghanistan, there are few points that come to my mind. The first is the geography, the situation of the country, where it is situated today. Geography is something you cannot change. And therefore, in and around, as I said, the countries who are in and around Afghanistan have always, brought the foreign elements to the country. And this is where, one needs to find out, is it the resources? Is it the ideology? And then what is the real game that is being played in Afghanistan? But the other point which is very clear is nobody has won the war in Afghanistan. And therefore, the biggest challenge today is how to manage, whether we call it peace or the process which is unfolding today. And the new dimension of the debate that we can see today, where Christian Wagner, he talks about the new approach of Europe and the Western forces after the withdrawal, where the commitment is going to be there, but the boots on ground are going to be out. Maybe, the military, the boots on ground have never, brought out the peace in real sense that way. That is very clear. There's also been debate that the regional countries were never, together, because every regional actor which was, involved in Afghanistan, had different interests. So there was no consensus among the regional partners to really work together, bringing peace and stability. The internal dimension, has been very clearly brought out by Ambassador Katju. Even Vishal has brought out a lot of other dimensions that we're talking about. Srikanth, when he talks about the role of China, for a very long time, I think China was not even interested in Afghanistan. Whenever we spoke about Afghanistan in the SCO forum meetings and otherwise, I never saw, China's interest in Afghanistan in that sense. But, off late, in last 10 to 12 years, that we've seen Chinese approach towards Afghanistan has changed. And I only hope, that the China will play a constructive role in terms of, building the internal capacity. On what terms and condition, I think it is still probably going to be seen in future how it unfolds, whether it is only going to protect, as Srikanth said, that its own interest, or will it be for the Afghanistan benefit in terms of economic development, in terms of the other political issues that we talk. But China, I don't think, would like to get involved in the political consensus in that sense. It would try and do the deals. That is what it has done in past. I don't know how it will unfold in future. Maybe he can, he has provided different scenarios of the involvement of China. But I don't know, Srikanth, how positive you would be as far as China's real challenge when it wants to step into the boots of United States today. What will be the real game that the Chinese have in their mind? I really don't know. It's difficult to read their mind because often they are very quiet. And what they say and they do are completely different things. So you being a Chinese expert, I'm sure you would be able to tell a little more on that. That is what it is. To Professor Wagner, I would say, yes, the Europeans cannot, unburden themselves by saying, yes, you've been there for good 20 years and you have still, ensured the commitment in terms of aid, in terms of your commitment to the civil societies. But what if you see a complete change? I don't rule out violence. I'm very positive, but at present, what we see is both the optimistic and the very pessimistic. There are not many hopes, but people are dreaming about the united, democratic, sovereign Afghanistan, which needs to be built by the international community. To what extent, this is an achievable goal, let's see. But I only hope what Afghanistan has achieved, as have been told by many, I guess, is sustained and managed. And to Vishal, often we've had this debate between us and also in IDSA. What role can India play? Really, other than the capacity building that we've been doing, we are very popular. We have done enough, whether we're talking about, our involvement in terms of, our in the education and building the parliament, whatever. The capacity building is something. and there is, much more expectations, from what do you think would be scenario in coming years? Do you really, yes, you referred to some sort of a consensus which might emerge amongst the neighboring countries, but for me, uncertainty is still the factor when we talk about Afghanistan. And I only hope that, the children, the women don't get affected by the reversal that is expected in case the Taliban's, return to power. Countries like China and even some of like Turkmenistan, they might buy peace with them. But what happens to the people inside there? So I would rather stop here. And I wish well for the Afghan people, the women, the children, and all that we have been talking about. Thank you. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh Roy. I will request all the three speakers. I will come to make short comments, and then I will come to Dr. Wailawad and Professor Ghoshal to make their concluding comments. So I think we can begin with Professor Kondapalli.
Thank you very much. It was pretty good discussion. Let me also thank Meena for raising those issues and my fellow panelists for giving me a lot of inputs on this issue. I think when we look at some of the conflict zones across the globe, China's first measure is they kind of divide the internal and the external, try to stabilize the external and try to work out with the domestic. And in this case, it is more likely that they will work through the Taliban, which is their tested, in a way, interlocutor in Afghanistan. Secondly, with the Himalayan Quad or other Chinese-led multilateral institutions like the SCO, they would be able to provide the external stabilizing factor. But the most crucial thing for them, obviously, is the success of the BRI and how these minerals from Afghanistan can be channelized for the Chinese rise. So I think the costs and the benefits factor is weighed extensively in the Chinese calculus. So when we look at in the last decade and a half, China has not spent much money in all these. The Aina copper mine has been stuck partly because of the archaeological related issues and others. The other infrastructure projects also got stuck partly because of the regional security issues. So, but China has not spent really much. On the other hand, when we look at the trade deficit, hardly Afghanistan exports to China, but substantial 95% of trade is Chinese exports to Afghanistan. So in fact, Chinese trade figures suggest with these huge surpluses that it has built up, it can afford to kind of provide for the limited relief that they have done, that $70 million for the law and order related. So when we look at the balance sheet, I think China did well. They tried to contain the impact on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Secondly, also in terms of the regional, that is in Central Asian republics, through their diplomatic and other engagement processes. So I think what is going to evolve from September is not clear, but this is probably the way the Chinese would reconstruct.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wagner, if you could make your response.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Meena, for your comments and question, also for my fellow speakers here for their presentations. I think what we will also see with the withdrawal of NATO troops, let's put it in a more general, in a more broader perspective. We will also see the closing of a chapter of a period where there was the idea that there can be state and nation building being done by external powers. I think Afghanistan, unfortunately, is a case or an example where we will see it will not work. I mean, Professor Ghoshal has mentioned it depends on the domestic situation. So external powers can support the process, yes, but they cannot substitute the process. So this is why we will see a new phase coming where the international community here, the Western countries, they will focus in their support for Afghanistan on issues like democracy and human rights. And one should not forget, and I think the point has also been made by other speakers, that the roadmap to peace is linked with economic development. Professor Ghoshal mentioned it. As long as the economic situation is so difficult as it is at the moment in Afghanistan, we will see no sustainable peace in the country. So Western governments or the EU have clearly linked the support for economic collaboration with Afghanistan also to some progress in areas like democracy and human rights. So this is a very tricky leverage. Yes, one has to play it very smart, but I think that's also an important leverage. And I think we will have a special focus, especially in the Western countries, with the focus on women's rights. We have seen a lot of progress in the promotion of women in Afghanistan. And I think we have also strong lobby groups here in the West who will certainly not like to see these kind of progress being decreased in the years to come. So in that sense, I think Afghanistan with the withdrawal in Afghanistan, there will be a closing of the chapter on the role of the international community, and this is also an interesting development for us as scholars in how far we can support peace and development in such a war-torn society from outside. And this, of course, will also raise some interesting points for the neighboring countries. We have focused here the role of the neighbors much more on security, but I think the neighbors also have to think more smart about strategies, and there are some initiatives out there to support the economic development. And I think with the joint approach by the Western countries as well as by the neighbors, I think this would be one alternative for a hopefully prosperous and peaceful Afghanistan. Thank you.
I will now come to Mr. Vishal Chandra, and along with the question posed by Dr. Meena. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I also want to ask you that, if you could also talk about the role of the United States for the last 20 years, the very concept of nation building and all of that. And if you could critique that and look at it, how it has influenced now that we are almost coming to the end of the US presence in Afghanistan. So if you could, kind of look back for the last 20 years and see how it has affected or impacted Afghanistan. Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. I think last 20 years, a vast section of Afghan population has benefited from a greater Western engagement, greater international presence in Afghanistan. One can be critical about it, but then one cannot deny the fact that whatever little or more progress that Afghanistan has seen, the new Afghanistan that we often talk about has to an extent been shaped by Western assistance and engagement, despite all shortcomings, lack of farsightedness, etc. Of course, there are countries from the region which too have played a very important role initially to begin with in terms of widening the space that Afghanistan needed to strengthen its state structures. We are talking of a country which in 2000, 2001 hardly had any state structures in place, hardly had a police force or an army. But despite all challenges and all shortcomings in terms of approaches adopted by the Western countries, I don't see any point in going back to 10 years back and examining the Western reconstruction strategies. This whole idea of having a provincial reconstruction teams in different parts of the country, it didn't really made its impact. But over the years, the greater engagement with the Western countries and with some of the regional countries, particularly India and some other regional countries, discourse had changed in Afghanistan. That is why I started off my presentation by reflecting on the shifting discourses last couple of months, because the way Doha agreement or Doha negotiations took place. Now, in a way, the discourse that was there until a couple of years back stands negated by the way Doha agreement was reached, and an elected government was expected to fulfill the terms and conditions, though it was not involved officially or directly during the entire 18 months of negotiations. Now, coming to India's role, I think this is one question we have been, because we are often told that India should do more in addition to what we are already doing, what we have already been doing last 20 years. And we often, throw this question back to those questioning us. What more do you expect us to do? I mean, despite regional constraints, we do not practically have contiguous borders. Pakistan continues to deny us overland transit facility. We are perhaps the largest assistance provider from the region, fifth largest if I remember correctly. And we have our reconstruction projects are spread across almost all 34 provinces of the country. We have carried out major, huge reconstruction projects in the face of various challenges we faced. I would not like to go into the detail how we completed the Zara and Dilaram road, the kind of casualties we had to take in, and the kind of difficulties we faced by carrying out those large reconstruction projects, which most of the countries had refused to even consider. So, and then currently, I think we have been extremely adaptive and innovative in terms of ensuring that we continue to provide assistance, extend assistance to the people of Afghanistan. And that explains more than 500 small development projects that we are carrying out. I think we are the only country which has projects in almost all provinces of Afghanistan. There is an air freight corridor. Today, Afghan dry fruits and other products are being flown to Delhi and other places. And there are other countries which are thinking of Afghanistan has created more air freight corridors. And there are other countries which are thinking of working along similar lines. Now, another important aspect of India's reconstruction assistance has been that we now have a good experience of carrying out reconstruction projects, assistance programs in an in-conflict situation. We are not talking of a post-conflict situation here in Afghanistan. We are talking of years when the conflict has been on, and we have carried out projects amidst local tensions, amid violence at the local level, and mechanisms have been devised based on our personal experience of carrying out projects, our own individual experience of carrying out projects in different parts of Afghanistan. We are talking of a very diverse country. The politics is very diverse. The power structures at the local level are very diverse. But then we have negotiated our way and fulfilled most of our commitments, including large and small medium and small reconstruction projects. Now, as I said earlier, even Afghans, when we talk to them, we have interaction, we have Afghan delegations coming over, and Dr. Meena has been part of several of them. Now, most of the time when we ask them what more they do not really come out with any concrete, in addition to what we are already doing. They expect us to play a more active diplomatic role. Well, as I said in my presentation, I think India will be playing a more active diplomatic role. Well, President Biden has talked about a wider regional approach vis-a-vis Afghanistan. President Obama too had spoken about it back in 2009, but it was never materialized. But now we are talking of a different context, a different environment altogether. So obviously, I do foresee, continuing dialogue, something which Ambassador Khalilzad has been doing 2018. One can agree or disagree, but definitely a process is there and dialogue is on. Everyone seems to be talking to everyone as far as the Afghan situation is concerned. And I think India is very well positioned because we'll continue to work, as I said, with the current government, but should a different political setup emerge, and I think we are well positioned to deal with an alternate scenario as well. We are very well positioned to deal with any political setup that emerges. So far or so long, it is recognized by the United Nations and it enjoys legitimacy within Afghanistan. We have always worked with the central governments. We will continue to work with the UN-recognized governments in Afghanistan, because any political arrangement that emerges would require international and regional aid and assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vishal, for your comments. And I think now I request Dr. Wail Awad, Distinguished Advisor for West Asia Tillotoma Foundation, to sort of sum the thing up, and then we will come to Professor Ghoshal to make his concluding remarks.
Thank you, Soham. Thank you very much for all the distinguished guests and the panelists on the this discussion, which is taking longer than expected because of the importance of these issues. But I think we all agree that it is an issue where we have to see the heart of Asia now again reviving. Should go for a proxy wars or should go for a stability? But I can see from what my colleague Meena have said, I will not elaborate more than her, but only endorse what she has said. But let me just throw questions to everyone. If this is, we are talking of a 20 years of Afghanistan or a 42 years of Afghanistan, what is really the objective? Why then the war was on, and now why the war is ended? There has to be an answer to this. If countries of international players are unable to put their own objectives on the table and declared agenda or undeclared agenda, then we are coming back to the great powers game in Afghanistan, where we will see again a conflict of different dimension. I think this is an issue we all hunting, all of us, that seriously, are we talking positively of a peace in Afghanistan, or is Afghanistan heading for disintegration? I think these two issues has to be highlighted, and we need to have a sort of an answer because we need to see the trends where it is really taking us in the near future of Afghanistan. The second part is, I mean, did again the United States picks the wrong brokers for peace in Afghanistan? Look, you're picking up Qatar, you're picking up Turkey, and you're talking Islamization again. You're bringing back the radicalism, fundamentalism, extremism into South Asia. These are issues, I think, of great concern to all of us. We need to see what exactly the regional players can do in stabilizing Afghanistan. I'm sure every stakeholders in the area are interested in a stable Afghanistan. The prosperity, the future of Afghanistan is of a great importance for all of the regional players, and I'm sure the international community has to play a role in stabilizing Afghanistan. But these are the issues. Drugs issues has not been touched upon. Terrorism has not been touched upon. Are we heading? Where do we see the future road of Afghanistan? These are the issues hunting me, and I wanted some of you elaborate if possible. If not, then we will conclude the remark with Vishal, because Vishal have written very interesting book of a history, 2 volumes of the history of Afghanistan, and I have interestingly read it and enjoyed his focus on that period of history. And I think, Vishal, we need to see, are we repeating history of 42 years ago, or we are going to see different Afghanistan in a different environment with the new rearrangement, a realignment of the new lines we have seen now developing in the new international new world order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Watt. I think because you have posed a question, maybe we can take 1 minute comment from, maybe we can begin with Mr. Vishal.
Well, I think that's a very relevant question, but that leads to another important question. Whether the current political system or the system that emerged from the Bonn process, from the Bonn conference, has failed to emerge as a viable alternate to the Taliban kind of political system that the Taliban had created in 1990s. Now, that's a major question, and there are various nuances to it. If one were to look for an alternate political system, because one of the most negative sides of the ongoing so-called peace process is that it will raise a very disturbing question, which is how centralized or how decentralized Afghanistan's political system should be. And this is where I feel that the current political processes is leading to the fragmentation of the political elites of Afghanistan. Instead of coming together and putting up a show of unity, the current political process, in my view, seems to be dividing the political elite of Afghanistan. I think it is for countries like India and Iran and other neighboring countries, Russia, to come in and try and ensure that the political elite of Afghanistan, cutting across the political spectrum, I'm not including, of course, I'm not talking of Taliban here, because in my personal view, there is no consensus within the Taliban even when it comes to talking to groups from the north. I think Taliban obviously are not as much concerned about President Ghani. Their main concern is how to deal with the groups from the north, because they have because the structures are still in place. They're pretty resourceful. They are well organized, relatively well organized. Let me put it this way, and the leadership structures. Well, it may not be as unified as it was back during Commander Ahmed Massoud's time, but definitely the leadership structures are intact compared to non-Taliban Pashtuns, which are dispersed, scattered, and they're not as organized. So obviously for Taliban, the priority is how to negotiate with the groups from the north, because they emerged far more organized post-2001, far more influential, and far more focused, and they have come to have stakes in the current political system. Non-Taliban Pashtun leadership has worked with the rest. They have a far more inclusive, far more broad-based view of Afghanistan, and they have a national vision, and they have a developmental vision to offer. Taliban doesn't have any, because for Pakistan it's very easy to use these illiterate or semi-literate boys from rural Pashtun villages, and because the infrastructure, as I said, is very much in place, they can easily churn out fighters in the years to come. What I am suggesting, if there has to be a roadmap, then one has to identify certain things that cannot be compromised. That Afghanistan has to be an Islamic republic, number one. Afghanistan has to protect its national flag, has to protect the basic character of its constitution. Constitutions can be amended. Amendments do take place, but the basic character, the spirit of the Afghan constitution, which acknowledges, it identifies all the major ethnicities of Afghanistan. If you look at the national anthem, go through the preamble of the constitution, it acknowledges the contemporary Afghanistan. So Afghanistan cannot go back to 90s, and that is a very broad consensus. But as I pointed out earlier, what form of political arrangement, what form of alternate political structure one could think of if the current political system has failed to emerge as a viable alternate, there are two broad options here. Either, as far as the regional countries, including India, is concerned, either we continue to help build Afghan capacities to a point where they can deal with internal and external challenges with minimal support from outside, or we wait for, and this is again the second option. I think this is where Afghans need to ask this question: can they afford to wait for Pakistan to transform? I would leave at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think at this point I must move on to Professor Ghoshal to make a short concluding remark.
I think I'll pick up two things what Dr. Awed had mentioned about Turkey's role in the Afghan peace process. That's quite a doubtful kind of a situation, because Turkey, along with Pakistan as well as with Malaysia, they have been trying to build up some kind of an alternative to the Islamic OIC led by Saudi Arabia. And in fact, last year there was supposed to be a conference in Kuala Lumpur where even Imran Khan was supposed to join when Mahathir was the prime minister. But ultimately, of course, I think his hands were twisted, so he didn't go and join the conference because Saudi Arabia might have played a role. And I think that particular factor has to be taken into consideration, role of Turkey, UAE. And I would be surprised. In fact, Srikanth has already mentioned about it, that if the Taliban agrees to provide some kind of an assurance to the Chinese that they would not interfere so much with the Xinjiang, with the Uyghurs movement, China might also like the Taliban rule there. So if that happens, I think then the entire progress or the reconstruction kind of thing that we have been talking about, international participation, that will, I think, suffer a setback. So I think there are too many imponderables or too many factors that have to be taken into consideration before we can reach to any kind of conclusion on Afghan situation. There are too many ifs and buts. Well, let us hope at least that some of these ifs and buts could be at least reduced to some kind of an agreeable solution, both supported by the internal political dynamics as well as the external powers. Only then we can really imagine a more stable political system, and which can also maintain some kind of progress that has been made since the Taliban was thrown out of power in 2001. So I think we can only hope, and there are areas of optimism, there are areas of pessimism. Let us see how things shape up. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Professor Ghoshal. I think we have come towards the conclusion of this international seminar on Roadmap to Peace in Afghanistan, organized by Tillotoma Foundation. I must especially thank Dr. Meena Singh Roy, Senior Fellow for West and Central Asia, for her support. I must thank Professor Ghoshal. I must thank Dr. Wail Awad, all three of them for their support. I must also thank Ms. Kamakshi Wason, Office in Charge for our New Delhi office, for her support. And I thank all the speakers, especially distinguished speakers from Afghanistan, Ms. Koofi, and also the Ambassador of Uzbekistan to India, His Excellency Mr. Dilshod Akhatov. I thank you all, and I hope we will have further deliberation on these issues. I think we have highlighted the geopolitical issues, but also we have taken into consideration the humanitarian factors, the questions that matter the most as Afghanistan moves towards reconstruction, the questions of gender, of the gender rights and rights of the minorities, and all of these factors. I thank you all for joining here. Thank you so much.